Hi everyone, it's Alice. Welcome to another GRE video. Today we're going to be talking about an analyze and argument essay. I am still doing my free one-on-one meetings with anyone who wants to talk to me about GRE anything. So make sure to sign up with the link down in the pinned comment. If you're watching the future, I will also let you know there if I'm still doing these. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more GRE content, and let's jump right in. So what we want to do here is read the question, break it down, and then start to look at the actual essay that I have here. This was sent to me by someone from Reddit. If you want me to take a look at your essay, get in touch with me and I will do my best. So here we have the prompt. The following appeared as part of a business plan developed by the manager of the Rialto Movie Theater. Despite its downtown location, the Rialto Movie Theater, a local institution for 5 decades, must make big changes or close its doors forever. So this is really good because it gives you a lot of facts about the Rialto Movie Theater, the downtown location, the local institution, so that gives you an idea of the kind of clientele that they might be targeting, and the history of 50 years. So that is quite a long time to be existent. It also has actually the claim right here, which is rather unusual, but it's very useful for us. So the claim here is basically that the Rialto Movie Theater needs to make big, drastic changes or close forever. So as you think about that, you can start to wonder, what kind of big changes is this manager talking about, and why is the only alternative to close its doors forever? It should follow the example of the new Apex Theater in the mall outside of town. When the Apex opened last year, it featured a video arcade, plush carpeting and seats, and a state-of-the-art sound system. So here, this sentence is really good because it sets up the comparison group. So clearly, the manager of the Rialto Movie Theater is looking to basically copy the features of the Apex. Now, you can also see here that the Apex has a lot of different features. It is new, it is outside of town, and it has all of these fancy new perks. Now, the implication here, without even reading further, is that these benefits make it more attractive to customers, but technically we have no information about whether this is true or in what way they help to attract customers. So that's something to keep in mind. Continuing on, furthermore, in a recent survey, over 85% of respondents reported that the high price of newly released movies prevents them from going to the movies more than 5 times a year. So this is really good too because, yes, the sentence is spouting a few facts, and they seem to back up his claim that the Rialto needs to upgrade. But we have a ton of questions about this survey. Who would be the target audience for the Rialto, and are they the same people who are being surveyed? Are only newly released movies being shown in theaters? And would people even want to go to the movies more than 5 times a year if they had the financial means? How many times per year do people actually go to the movie theater? So these are really good questions that this sentence does not answer, so you want to be very cautious about believing exactly what this survey is talking about. For the survey itself, you can have a lot of concerns about that. One of my grad school classes is about how to actually conduct surveys well. So a lot of our concerns are who actually conducted the survey, what kind of biases are there, how are the questions written, are they pushing respondents to answer one way or another depending on how things are measured, how questions are asked, what answers are available if it's multiple choice or something like that. and how recent is recent when it talks about the recent survey. Right now we have the coronavirus pandemic going on, and obviously in a normal year, the beginning of the year could be recent, but now there's no way you can compare August 2020 to January 2020, for example. We also have this issue of the fact that the survey asks about how many times somebody goes to the movies per year, which is a very long time to think about how many times you can do something. So overall, this sentence about the survey gives us a lot of ammo to be able to attack the logical reasoning behind it. Lastly, it says, thus, if the Rialto intends to hold on to its share of a decreasing pool of moviegoers, it must offer the same features as Apex. So the issue here is that the manager talks about a decreasing pool of moviegoers, but there is no evidence that the pool of moviegoers is actually decreasing. Their survey doesn't talk about a change, and so there's no way to know if fewer people are going to the movies. And even if that was true, how would that even be measured? So are we talking about the number of movies that people see in theaters, or the number of people that go to theaters? Or are we talking about the income of the theaters, because that is a combination of the number of people, how many times they go, and things like how many concessions are bought, for example. So there are a lot of assumptions in this sentence when we're talking about getting the same features as Apex, because we are also here assuming that Apex is successful. We are assuming that Apex is quote unquote taking customers that would otherwise go to Rialto, whereas they technically could go to both of them. We're also assuming that new features like the fancy carpet, the fancy seating, the video arcade are going to attract new customers. And we are also assuming, and again, the whole idea here is that there are a million assumptions that we want to question. We're assuming that the Rialto and the Apex Theater are comparable in some way, even though they could be totally different types of theaters. You can think about the difference, for example, between luxury movie theaters, your normal or your standard movie theaters, your budget theaters, and the kind that show movies, maybe a month or two, typically in the time period between the big blockbuster opening and before it comes out on DVD or a streaming service. So the movies themselves tend to be like $1. So you can see here that we have a lot to work with, so I am excited to get into it. We have the question here, which is, write a response in which you discuss what questions would need to be answered in order to decide whether the recommendation is likely to have the predicted result. Be sure to explain how the answers to these questions would help to evaluate the recommendation. So in general, this is asking about what kind of information you would need to basically legitimize the manager's business proposal, but it is a really good business practice to, in any of your analyze and argument essays, to mention what kind of information is going to fill in those logical gaps, because it strengthens your own ability to talk about how you understand what kind of argument is being made. So with that, let's get started. This, by the way, was scored by somebody else and not me. So the introduction says, the manager of the Rialto Movie Theater proposes that in order for the Rialto Movie Theater to succeed, it must implement the same features and products that the other movie theater, Apex, has. You want to introduce what the argument is saying, so this is great. The author makes this proposal from an assumption deriving from a survey in which people reported that high prices of movies keeps them from going to the movies several times a year. This is also good because you want to explain what the original argument is based on. The only problem here is that in this particular question, the business proposal that the manager has made is not totally based on the survey, because the manager also looked at all the new features that Apex had and sort of assumed that they would be really good for Rialto as well. And so because of that, you want to maybe say in part or largely based on the survey. So you don't say that everything that the author or the manager says is because of that one result from the survey. Next, the proposal is unclear, and in order for it to be plausible and evaluated properly, a few questions need to be answered. So in this sentence, I have 2 points. The first one is this word unclear. I don't think that the proposal is unclear. I think it actually expresses itself pretty well. The problem here is that the conclusion that the manager has drawn is illogical or incorrect. So it's not unclear, it's incorrect or possibly incorrect. And the other thing is, if you've seen my other videos, you know I hate these sentences like a few questions need to be answered, because I think they are extremely vague and they don't prime the reader to know what you're going to be talking about in the rest of your essay. So instead of saying a few questions, tell them exactly what those questions are. The validity of the survey results, the success of Apex. So instead of just saying a few questions need to be answered, actually tell the reader what they're going to be reading, and that actually helps you as well when you're writing to know exactly what your body paragraphs are going to be talking about. All right, so let's take a look at the first body paragraph. First, is the Apex even successful? The first body paragraph is obviously talking about the success of Apex, which is really great. However, the way that our test taker does it is by asking a rhetorical question. In general, rhetorical questions are a terrible choice for essays. And the reason is because you are trying to answer a question and you're not trying to confuse your reader the way that you might in a discussion, for example. Here, you're really trying to lay out your own thoughts as clearly as possible. So you don't want to answer a question by asking your own question. Questions also tend to be very colloquial, so the style of your essay then tends to be a lot more informal, which is not what the GRE is really testing. Questions in general also are sort of meant to form a dialogue or to force the reader to pause and think, whereas in the GRE type of essays, that's really not what you're trying to do. You want your reader to continue reading and be interested in what you have to say. So instead, something better would be to say something like, first, whether Apex is successful is unclear, and then continue on. We are given information on the features of Apex, but we are not told that Apex is more successful than Rialto. Great point. In order for an accurate proposal to be made regarding the Apex Theater in comparison to Rialto, we would need to have data on the profits that Apex takes in as compared to Rialto. So this is a pretty good idea, and I would say it is reasonable to assume that profits is going to define success. However, there is no information that is telling you that that is exactly true. And the reality of it is that success can be measured in many, many different ways, especially if Rialto is sort of a small indie mom and pop shop, very traditional kind of theater. They might view success by the number of customers, by customer loyalty, customer satisfaction, employee loyalty, their reputation, etc. So there are a lot of different things that they could say instead. And because it's not defined in the original argument, you personally do not want to make that assumption. Continuing on, it is possible that Rialto actually makes more money than Apex. For example, Apex could have spent a great amount of money on all of these features, but may not have made a profit on it if a small amount of people actually go to this theater. Good point. What if Rialto is located in a busier location and brings in more people despite not having all the features that Apex does? This definitely is a good point, but you are really getting into the comparability of Rialto and Apex, which is a completely different point altogether. Here, we are really focusing on the success of Apex. And in this paragraph, you don't want to stray from the success of Apex. And by introducing this sentence, you're basically introducing a completely new idea, which throws off the organization of your essay. So in this particular paragraph, this sentence is not a good one, but you could definitely copy and paste the sentence into another paragraph that is actually talking about the comparability of the two theaters. On a side note, the manager's argument itself does talk about the downtown location of Rialto versus the mall outside of town for Apex, so I don't know if the location is the best detail to point out here. Anyways, let's continue on. If that is the case, then implementing the same features in Rialto may or may not have a significant result. It may not lead to a drastic change if more people were going to Rialto before anyways. This is another good point. What I want to say here is this word anyways is also an extremely colloquial word. We use it a lot when we talk about different things, but the way that we use it in speech is very, very casually. You really don't want to use anyways because it seems like you're talking to a friend. Instead, it would be better to rephrase it as something like, even if Rialto implemented the changes, their clientele may only increase insignificantly, if at all. Basically making the point that making these changes in Rialto may or may not even have any effect. Continuing on, in order for the manager's proposal to be relevant, we would need more information on the actual state of Apex and on how much profit it takes in. Here, I don't like the word relevant because the proposal is relevant. It's talking about the theater itself and it's making an argument, albeit a very illogical argument. Instead of relevant, I would say something like the manager's proposal should be viable or worthwhile. The second part of the sentence, which talks about what we would need, this is actually very well done. I think there could be one or two sentences that expands on that idea a little more instead of just putting it in at the very end of the paragraph. A lot of people fail to do this, but adding in that one sentence or two shows that you understand what makes a weak argument in its current state and why. And that's a huge difference between an essay that's 4 and below and an essay that's a 5 or a 6. But again, here the author talks about the profit that Apex takes in, which in our case, we don't know if profits is the definition of success. All right, looking at the next paragraph. Secondly, how comparable are Apex and Rialto? So here again, rhetorical question, would not recommend. To use Apex as an example of what to emulate in a movie theater would not be plausible if the two movie theaters are too different to compare. For example, Apex could potentially be located in a busy urban area, while Rialto could be located in the rustic countryside with a very small population and barely any visitors. If this is the case, implementing changes to Rialto may not result in much of a change since there is a small population in the area. While a few additional people may be attracted to the updated movie theater, it would not be a drastic change. In order for us to clearly understand the benefits of including some features that Apex has into the Rialto movie theater, we need more information on the comparability of the two movie theaters. So you'll notice that I read through almost that entire paragraph before making any comments. And the reason is because if you have watched my other videos, you already know, but it is what I call excessive speculation. And here, what I mean by that is if you look at all of these sentences about what exactly it could be that is different between Apex and Rialto, this test taker spends 3 sentences and basically 6 lines talking about the fact that Rialto and Apex could be located in different places. The reason that you shouldn't do this is because it doesn't matter what makes Rialto and Apex incomparable. The reason could be the location, but it could be something totally different, like the presence or absence of snacks, the types of movies that they have, the atmosphere, the neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. It does not matter what all these details are. And instead of spending half or maybe 2/3 of the entire paragraph talking about something that in this case is actually addressed in the prompt, where it says that Rialto is located in the city center and Apex is located in a mall outside of town, you want to recognize that there are a variety of facets that impact comparability. Once you recognize that there are a lot of different things that affect how two entities can be compared, then you can start to explain why it's so dangerous to start to compare these two things, even though on so many factors they could be super different. So instead of spending 6 lines talking about the location, I would say something like Apex and Rialto could differ on XYZ traits, and then start to explain why it's so dangerous to ignore those differences and assume that copying Apex is going to help Rialto. All right, so getting into the last sentence of this paragraph, if Apex and Rialto are both located in similar locations, then adding these new features may be a plausible idea. So here, a few things that I've mentioned before. Apex and Rialto are not necessarily different only on locations. Remember, there are a million different things that could impact how different they are and therefore how comparable they are. So you want to encapsulate all of that variety without giving too much attention to each of the details. You can also see here that the word plausible is underlined in red because it is a typo. This essay was directly copied and pasted, so you will see small typos like this. It's not a huge deal, and because there's only 1 or 2 and we know exactly what the author is saying, it doesn't impact her argument at all. So this really is no big deal. Moving on to the last body paragraph, we have, finally, how does this survey support the manager's proposal? I'm really glad that our test taker here decided to address the survey because, again, huge red flag for the survey, but don't use the rhetorical question. If most people do not visit the theater more than a few times a year because of the ticket prices, then shouldn't the manager be considering lowering ticket prices? This point is actually a really, really good point that I didn't even initially think of because I was kind of consumed with the credibility of the survey itself. But here, our test taker assumes that the survey is valid and then interprets the results. So this is a perfectly fine thing to do, especially because you have limited time, so you're not trying to break down every single detail and every single logical fallacy that exists because there are going to be a lot. And so here, our test taker has assumed that the survey is valid and is now talking about why the results still don't necessarily tell us that the Rialto should completely revamp their interior. So continuing on, if the survey is accurate, then upgrading the movie theater may actually hurt the movie theater's profits. So here I mentioned before, profits may not define success completely. This is because with an upgraded movie theater comes more expenses, and with more expenses, the manager would have to raise ticket prices. Ultimately, raising ticket prices may just lead to an even smaller number of moviegoers. If this is the case and the survey holds true, then the movie theater may not succeed financially by adding new features. So here, overall, this paragraph is relatively well written. The only thing is that this doesn't do what all of the other paragraphs have done, which is outlining what would make this argument reasonable and what information we are missing. So here, it's definitely possible to survey a certain demographic, such as a sample of people who have visited Rialto before, a certain age group, or anything like that, to find out what actually makes them come or not come to a movie theater. They could also look at a totally different type of data, so it doesn't have to be survey data, it could be customer reviews, it could be actual information about who is coming and who is not, and how much money they're spending, something like that. So here, the main idea is that you don't want to use rhetorical questions, and you want to challenge this idea that the manager said by saying that maybe an alternative solution could actually be lowering ticket prices, given that you have information that ticket prices may be the reason that people aren't coming. At the end, we have the conclusion here. The manager's argument, as it is now, is flawed. In order for this proposal to hold any water, we need a few questions answered. So that is relatively well written. You don't want your conclusion to add nothing. So you want to summarize your points, which our test taker does in the next sentence by saying, if we have more information regarding the profits the Apex brought in, as well as the accuracy and implications of the survey mentioned, then we could better evaluate this proposal. So here we have a very frank and complete listing out of the information that we would need for the manager to strengthen his argument a lot more. And so this essay was scored a 4.5 by someone else. I agree with that score. I think it could definitely be classified as a 5 because of how well our test taker here grasps the ideas of all of the logical fallacies and then explains them and gives information about what we would need to actually fix the shortcomings. I do think there are a few places where she could improve, namely by not using rhetorical questions and also understanding the incredible nuance that goes into talking about any type of argument. So there is a lot more that she could have explored, I think. But overall, it's very well written. I hope you were able to learn a lot from her. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Please put a comment in the comment box down below. I will read every one of them and respond to as many as I can. If you have suggestions about things you'd like to see on my channel, let me know. Otherwise, make an appointment with me. I would love to meet you and help you out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.